Good morning, students. My name is SUVAS VORA, Assistant Professor of Electrical Department at Sri Swaminarayan Institute of Technology. So, in the last lectures, we can learn about the relief, rehabilitation, post-disasters, recovery, and reconstructions. So, relief means the refers assistance to those affected by the disaster based on the initial rapid assess of the need and designed to contribute the effectively and speedily to the early recovery. यानी कि जो अर्ली रिकवरी जब डिजास्टर होता है उसके बाद जब अर्ली रिकवरी करना होता है तो उसको बोलते हैं रिलीफ एंड द रिहेबिलाइजेशंस मीन्स द रिकन्स्ट्रक्शंस एंड द सस्टेनेबल recovery refers to measures that help restore the livelihood, assist and the productions level of the emergency affect the communities. यानी कि डिज़ास्टर होने के बाद रिकवरी करने के लिए और रेगुलर लाइफ जो हम अभी जी रहे हैं वो रेगुलर लाइफ लाने के लिए जो प्रोसेस करते हैं उसको बोलते हैं रिहेबिलाइजेशंस. So the rehabilitations and the reconstructions include the measure which help increase the realizations of the food system in case of the further disaster and emergencies. So the types of the quantity of relief supplies is determined by type of disaster, resources available and initial phase. Most important of these supplies are health supplies and resources supplies. So some commodities like the food, blankets, shelters, sanitizers, etc. will be in a secondary side. Health is the most priority of the disasters. यानी कि जब डिज़ास्टर्स होता है तो सबसे पहली प्रायोरिटी होती है सबकी हेल्थ और सबको लाइव करना या उसको हेल्प करना. सो द डैमेज एसेस टू managing their relief supplies, equalization supplies, transportation, storage and distributions. So these are the introductions for the relief and realizations. So relief planning is for the management of the medical supplies, assessment of the immediate health needs, then care and shelters यानी कि relief camp, then environmental management for the waters, personal hygiene, vector control and basic sanitizations, then food safety, clothing and utensils, disposables of the dead. So these are the main relief plans. Then after we can learn about the general global rapid post disaster damage estimations. It means the GRADE approach. So rapid post disaster damage assess approach and the tools can within the short period of time quantities and damage to the physical assessed and associate replacement cost. यानी कि डिज़ास्टर होने के बाद तुरंत जो डिज़ास्टर्स असेस करना पड़ता है यानी कि जो रिकवरी के लिए स्टार्ट करना होता है इनिशियल स्टेज में उसके लिए ए रैपिड पोस्ट डिज़ास्टर डैमेज एसेस एस्टिमेशंस ऑर्गेनाइजिंग होता है. सो quantify the damage to higher level to details disaster risk modeling techniques in combinations which historical damage data and sense and socioeconomic surveys and as well as the other use. So these are the include in the global rapid post disaster management. Then after we can see that the immediate priority structures. So these are easily understood by this. So the innovations aspect of the GRDE approach, the improper information from vast variety of data set combinatively and verifying the result. So the approach of is time and resource is direct damage to property, direct damage to estimations, then GDP, estimation of human, then after is human crisis, then fundamentals. So these are all includes for these tables. So you can see that we can see the hazard modeling, then exposure modeling, vulnerability modeling, and damage estimation. So there are the four basic approaches in the GRDA approaches. Then after we can see that early recovery. So in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, the focus of the national and the international actors is primarily on meeting the life saving needs. So the understable human lives are at a risk, and the quick actions is required to minimize the damage and restore the order. यानी कि ये डैमेज और क्राइसिस होने के बाद किस तरह से रिकवरी कर सकते हैं उसके लिए है. सो यू कैन सी हियर्स द ह्यूमिलाइजेशन फेज एंड डेवलपमेंट फेज. यानी कि जब ह्यूमिलाइजेशन फेज इनिशियल होता है तब इनिशियल लेवल पे होता है डेवलपिंग फेज, एंड जब वो कंप्लीट होने का स्टार्ट हो जाता है तब डेवलपिंग फेज मैक्सिमम हो जाता है. सो दिस आर द बेसिक इंट्रोडक्शन फॉर द अर्ली रिकवरी सिस्टम्स. So then after the working group of the early recovery systems, then after table and etc. Then after we can see that the disaster recovery. So recovery involves the measure which support the emergency affect the areas. So generally the representations and the rehabilitations. So providing the temporary shelters and everything will be considered there. You can see that the recovery and reconstructions. So here you can see that जब धरतीकंप हुआ था तब इस तरह का सिचुएशन होता है, एंड देन आफ्टर द रिकन्स्ट्रक्ट करके इस तरह से हम मॉडिफाई करते हैं. सो दिस आर दी रिकन्स्ट्रक्शंस, वी नो दैट. सो व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द रिकवरी, रिहेबिलिटेशंस एंड रिकन्स्ट्रक्शंस? So we can see the one example here. So first one, you can see the chair is a simple chair and the old chair. When the man will be sit on the chair, at that time the chair will be destroyed. It means the disaster will be occurs. So this one is called chair. हम जोड़ के रखते हैं तो उसको बोलते हैं रिहेबिलाइजेशन. यानी कि तोड़ मड़ोड़ के हम कुछ भी करके वो रखना चाहते हैं. एंड रिकन्स्ट्रक्शंस यानी कि इस चेयर को मॉडिफाई करके हम इस तरह का हम मॉडिफाई कर दें तो डिजास्टर्स नहीं होता है. सो आफ्टर द डिजास्टर वी कैन रिकन्स्ट्रक्ट इन द मोर इफेक्टिवली. सो इन द लास्ट लेक्चर वी कैन सी दिस. नाउ द टुडेज टॉपिक इज द लास्ट टॉपिक फॉर दिस चैप्टर्स, योकोहामा स्ट्रेटजी एंड द योगो फ्रेमवर्क्स. सो स्टार्ट विद द योकोहामा मैसेज. So Yokohama, what is the Yokohama? So in the state member of the United Nations and the other state having at the world get the one conference. The conference is the World Conference on the Natural Disaster Reductions, and in the city of Yokohama, Japan, in 23rd May to 27th May in 1994. So in the participants with the non-government organizations and with the participants of the international organizations, scientific community, business, industries and media, deliberating within the framework of the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reductions. यानी कि जापान में योकोहामा जो स्टेट है वहाँ पे 1994 में एक वर्ल्ड कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई थी फॉर ऑन दी नेचुरल डिजास्टर रिडक्शंस. अगर नेचुरल डिजास्टर्स होता है तो उसको रिडक्शंस करने के लिए किस तरह से हम हेल्प कर सकते हैं उसकी एक वर्ल्ड ऑर्गेनाइजिंग हुई थी, कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई थी जिसमें नॉन गवर्नमेंट बॉडीज़, देन आफ्टर दे सम अदर पार्टिसिपेंट ऑर्गेनाइजिंग कंपनीज, मेडिकल टीम, देन बिजनेसमैन, एवरीथिंग विल बी देयर फॉर द डिस्कशन फॉर हाउ टू रिड्यूस दी प्रॉब्लम व्हेन द डिजास्टर. जैसे हम देखते हैं कि अगर इंडिया में अगर सुनामी आता है तो या कुछ भी आता है तो बाहर से फंड आता है। अदरवाइज़ दूसरी कंट्री में अगर नेचुरल डिजास्टर आता है, जैसे कि सुनामी अभी आया था, तो हम यहाँ से फंड वहाँ पर जाते हैं। तो ये जो सब कुछ है वो इसीलिए है क्योंकि एक ऑर्गेनाइजिंग था जिसमें कॉन्फ्रेंस में ये सब कुछ डिसाइड हुआ था, और वो पूरा प्लान और एक्शंस, ये जो दोनों स्ट्रेटजी आप पढ़ेंगे, योकोहामा स्ट्रेटजी एंड द ह्योगो फ्रेमवर्क, उसमें आपको पता चल जाएगा। सो योकोहामा स्ट्रेटजी, so disaster reduction strategy, so appraising about the deep concern for conducting the human suffering and the distributions of the development causing by the natural disaster and inspired by the Yokohama strategy and the plan of actions for the safe world. So ये क्या था? So Yokohama strategy and the plan of action for the safer world. The first point is the impact of the natural disasters. So in terms of the human and the economic losses has rises in the recent years, and the society in the general has become more vulnerable to the natural disasters. यानी कि इकोनॉमिक बहुत ही, जब नेचुरल डिजास्टर होता है तो इकोनॉमिकली बहुत अफेक्ट होता है, बिकॉज द जो जैसे कि धरतीकंप हम कंसिडर करते हैं, तो धरतीकंप हम जानते हैं कि कितना कितना नुकसान होता है, तो उसके लिए इकोनॉमिक्स विल बी मोर अफेक्टेड. सो those usually most affected by the natural and the other disasters are in the poor and the socially disadvantaged group in the developing countries, as they are least equipped to cope with them. यानी कि हम सभी को उनको डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली हेल्प करनी चाहिए. The next one is the disaster preventions, mitigations, preparations and relief. So the disaster preventions, mitigations, preparation and relief are the four main elements which contribute to, again, from the implementation of the sustainable development policies. So these elements, along with the environmental protections and the sustainable developments, are closely interconnected. So therefore the national should be incorporate them in their development plans and ensure the efficient follow-up measurement at the communities, national and international levels. So the next one is the world is increasingly interdependent. So the world is increasingly independent. It means that all countries shall act in the new spirit of the partnership to build a safer world based on the common interest and the share the responsibility to save the human lives. Science, natural disasters do not respect the borders. So regions and the international corporations will be significantly enhance our ability to achieve the real process in mitigating disasters through the transfer of the technology. यानी कि इस पॉइंट में कोई भी बॉर्डर को हम कंसीडर नहीं करके एक इंसानियत के नाते ऐसे हम दोनों कंट्रीज़ को बॉन्डिंग करते हैं कि जो जब भी डिज़ास्टर होता है तो विदाउट एनी इन्फ्लुएंस और विदाउट एनी इंटरप्शंस हम एक दूसरे को हेल्प कर सकें. देन आफ्टर द इंफॉर्मेशंस, नॉलेज एंड सम ऑफ द टेक्नोलॉजीज. सो इन दिस point, the necessary to reduce the effect of the natural disasters can be achieved in many cases at a low cost and should be applied. So appropriate technology and data with the corresponding training should be made available to freely. यानी कि जैसे हमको अभी की सिचुएशंस पता है कि जैसे कि अमेरिका ने कहा था कि इंडिया वालों से ये दवाई ये चाहिए, जिसकी वजह से वो लोग ऐसा सोचते हैं कि कोरोना इफ़ेक्ट है वो हम कम कर सकें. तो वही यहाँ पे जो मेडिकल टीम और मेडिकल कंपनीज थी, फार्मास्यूटिकल कंपनी थी, उसने वो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग ज़्यादा कर दी, जिससे इंडिया में और बाहर की कंट्रीज़ को जिनको रिक्वायरमेंट है, जहाँ पे बहुत ही उसका अफेक्ट है, उसको सप्लाई कर सके. तो यहाँ पे वही है कि जो हमारे पास नॉलेज है, इंफॉर्मेशन है, हम शेयर करें, डेटा है वो शेयर करें. Then after, the community involves and their activities active participants. So in this point we can encourage in the order to gain greater insight into the individual and the collective perceptions of the development and risk, and they have the clear understanding of the culture and organizational characteristic of each society as well as of its behaviors and interactions with the physical and natural environment. So this knowledge is of the almost the importance to determine those things which favor and the hinder the preventions and mitigations or encourage or limitations the preventions of the environments. सो यहाँ पे हम वहाँ की कम्युनिटी को या वहाँ के जो कल्चर को हो जान के समझ के हम पूरी एक्टिविटीज़ और वहाँ की कल्चर को किस तरह से समझा के वो एक्टिव पार्टिसिपेंट्स, क्योंकि जब डिज़ास्टर होता है तब गवर्नमेंट पूरी तरह से हेल्प नहीं कर सकती है. हमको एज अ पार्ट ऑफ द एजुकेशंस में ये करना चाहिए, क्योंकि हमको गवर्नमेंट को और लाइफ को दोनों को सेव कर सकते हैं. देन आफ्टर the framework of the actions of internal decade. So in these points, so the natural disaster reductions provides all the vulnerable countries in the particular and developing countries so with the appropriate or opportunity to achieve the safe world by the end of the century and beyond. So these are the frameworks, and Yokohama conference is at the crossroad in the human programs. So in one directions lie the merge the result of the extraordinary opportunity given to the United Nations and its members state. In the other directions, the United Nations and the world community can be changed the कोर्स ऑफ इवेंट बाय रिड्यूसिंग द सफरिंग फ्रॉम द नेचुरल डिज़ास्टर्स. यानी कि योकोहामा कॉन्फ्रेंस में जो वर्ल्ड लेवल की जो डिज़ास्टर नेचुरल डिज़ास्टर्स के जो इफ़ेक्ट होती है, जो एक दूसरी कंट्री को हेल्प कर सकती है, उसके लिए पूरी प्रोसेस की थी. तो दिस आर द मैसेज फ्रॉम द योकोहामा. सो नाउ द योकोहामा स्ट्रेटजी एंड द रिलेटेड प्लान ऑफ एक्शंस. सो द फर्स्ट वन इज will not that each country has the serving the responsibility to protect its citizens from the natural disasters. We know that कि अकेली कंट्री अपने सिटीज़न को बचाने के लिए कुछ नहीं कर सकती. So will give the proper priority attentions to the developing countries and the in particular the last development लॉक्ड कंट्रीज एंड स्मॉल आइसलैंड डेवलपिंग स्टेट्स. यानी कि इन तीनों चीज़ जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ है, दैन लैंड्स लॉक्ड कंट्रीज़ है, जो स्मॉल आइसलैंड है, उसको किस तरह से डेवलपिंग कर सके. एंड विल डेवलप एंड द स्ट्रेंथ द नेशनल कैपेसिटी एंड द कैपेबिलिटी एंड वेयर अप्रोप्रिएट नेशनल डायग्नोस्टिक ऑफ द नेचुरल एंड अदर डिजास्टर प्रिवेंशंस. So the mitigations and the preparedness including the mobilizations of non-governmental organizing and participants of the local communities. So these are the three main points. Then after the last point is will promote and the strength the regional and the interactional corporative in the activities to prevent the reduce and the mitigation nature and the other disasters with the particular emphasis. So the consider for the human and international capacity building and strengthening technology sharing and mobilizations of the resources. So these 3 points will be 4 points will be considered for the Yokohama strategy and the related plan for actions. So what is the main principles point for the Yokohama? The first one is the risk assessment is a required step. Then after the disaster preventions and preparedness reduce the need for the disaster relief. Then after the disaster preventions and the preparedness are integral aspect of the development and policy, then development and the strengthening of capacity, early warning of the immediately disasters, then after the participants at all level in preventions, vulnerability, then technology, environmental protections, and the last one is the each country bear with the primary responsibility for the protection its people, infrastructures and the other national assets from the impact of natural disaster. So these are the main 10 points we'll consider in the Yokohama Principles. Now, the strategy or the in 2000s and the beyond, the World Conference based on the adoptions of the principles and the assessment of the program, the accomplished during the first half of the decade has the formulated the strategy for the disaster reduction centers on the objectives of saving human lives and property, and then after the strategy calls for the acceleration importance of the plan of actions. So the development of the global cultures of the preventions as the essential component of the integrated approach to disaster reductions. Now we can discuss about the Yokohama framework. So Yokohama framework, so this one is also the World Conference on the Disasters Reductions held on the Hyogo in Japan in January 2005, at which the Tanzanian participant had adopted the 5 points for the actions, and the subsequent refers to as the Yokohama framework for the actions. So योकोहामा फ्रेमवर्क जनवरी 2005 में एक वर्ल्ड कॉन्फ्रेंस हुआ था इन जापान, एंड द स्टेट इज द योगो. सो दिस priority were developed from the acknowledgement that the most appropriate way to reduce the disaster risk was to integrate the various effects symmetrically into the policies, plans and programmers for the situations debate and the providing reduction support at all the levels and all participants. So these are considered in the Hyogo framework. So what is the framework? The World Conference on the Disaster in COP in the Japan is 2005 identify the 5 main points. The first one is ensure that the disaster risk reductions is a national and the local priority with the strong institutional basis for the implementations. Then after the identify, assess and the monitor the disaster risk and enhance the early warning systems. Then after use the knowledge, it means the innovations and the educations to build the culture of the safety and reliance at all levels. इसीलिए हम कहते हैं कि इंजीनियरिंग जो फील्ड है वो डेवलपिंग के लिए है, नहीं कि जॉब करने के लिए. हमको इस तरह की नेचुरल डिजास्टर से किस तरह से हम बच सके. हम यूट्यूब पे बहुत सारे ऐसे वीडियोस देखते हैं कि किस तरह से नए नए जो गैजेट्स होते हैं वो इन्वेंट्स होते हैं. तो दिस आर द बेस्ट एग्जांपल्स. द रिड्यूस द अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ रिस्क फैक्टर एंड द strength the disaster preparedness for the effective responsible for all levels. So these are the 5 main framework actions. So in the strategy for the years and the beyond, so the adoptions of the policy and the self-reliance in each the valuable countries and community. Then after the educations and the training in the disaster preventions and preparedness and mitigations, important of the awareness in the valuable countries. Then after the involvement and the actions participants of the people in the disasters reductions, prevention and preparedness, and improved risk assessment, broad monitoring and communications of the actions and warnings. So these are the strategy in 2000 and beyond. Now Yokohama frameworks is the global blueprint for the disaster risk reduction efforts during the next decades, and its goal is to sustainability reduce the disaster loss by the 2015 in lives and in the social, economics and environment assets of the communities and countries. So Yokohama framework offers guideline principles, priorities for the actions and the particle means for the achieving the disaster reliance for the valuable countries. So Yokohama framework have the five main points is ensure the DDR यानी कि disaster risk reductions is the national and the local priorities. Then after the identify, assess and monitoring disaster risk and enhance the early warning systems. Then use the knowledge, reduce the dealing the risk factors, then strengthens disaster preparedness for the effective response at all levels. And Hyogo framework actions also identify four priorities cross-cutting areas for reduction the disaster risk: gender capacity development, then communities, volunteers and climate change adaptations. So today we can learn about the two main frameworks. So your worksheet questions is first two questions is your worksheet questions, Yokohama strategies and the Hyogo framework actions, and the last one the write the short note on the Yokohama framework action plan is your assignment questions. If any query for this topic, you can call me and mail me. My mail ID and the contact number is seen your screen. Thank you.